Someone came running into Arthur's Stanley home. He panicked and asked if it was true that Reynolds' son was still alive. But once in the living room, he was confused to see what was going on there. Arthur knew immediately that these were the people who had taken care of his family. Reynolds then introduced Vincent and Tabitha to Arthur, who had actually returned. Reynolds also introduces them to Arthur as the manager of the auction house and an old friend who now works with him. The house was also Vincent's, so Arthur asked him to introduce himself before he ruined it. Arthur greeted the two men cordially. Arthur also said that he was sure it was all too shocking for them, but he was the one who asked his parents not to tell anything about him. Therefore, Arthur apologized for the misunderstanding. Vincent, of course, was mesmerized by Arthur's words. He even asked if Arthur was sure he was related to Reynolds. Of course, Reynolds admitted that he often heard the same question, but they were indeed family. Tabitha was happy to welcome Arthur into their home. She then also introduced the girl next door named Lilia. She was the same age as Arthur, so she hoped they could be friends. Arthur said hello with a smile, and it made Lilia easily fall in love. Meanwhile, Vincent asked what Reynolds meant by destroying his house. Reynolds remembers that he and Arthur were just about to go out for sparring. Of course, hearing that, Vincent became worried. In the backyard, Alice was seen talking to Tabitha. Meanwhile, Lilia was seen playing with Eleanor and Sylvie. Meanwhile, Vincent approaches Alice and asks if Reynolds is serious about what he said, that Arthur is now a light red wizard. Tabitha asked him to sit down. While Alice herself was surprised, Arthur had always learned quickly, and there was no reason for him to lie. Vincent was certainly a little doubtful that an 8-year-old child had not only awakened, but also progressed by 3 stages. Even the arrogant boy geniuses who were accepted into Cyrus Academy were barely in the dark red stage. They were also usually between 11 or 12 years old. Arthur, who heard that, thought that it was best not to tell them that he was only light res because he did not train the mana core during the merge with Sylvia's will. Reynolds was already in the ready position, and he also made sure Arthur was ready because he was no longer the same. Arthur also acknowledged the same, and he immediately moved so quickly that he delivered a hard punch that Reynolds managed to block. Reynolds told his son to try harder, but Arthur quickly kicked his father's hand, and then tried to elbow him in the chest. But Reynolds quickly grabbed Arthur's wrist. Arthur lifted his father's body and slammed him down, even though Reynolds was able to land with both hands. Arthur asked his father what he thought at the time. Reynolds recognized that Arthur's skills were not bad that morning. He admits that Arthur can attack him when he is caught off guard. But now Reynolds was going to start fighting seriously. He showed a trick he learned after he broke through the dark orange stage. Reynolds used the fire element within himself and made sure that he had warned Arthur beforehand. Wizards, starting from awakening, always had a closeness of power in terms of the element that could be controlled the most. Parents sought out expensive professional testers for their children so that they could learn early on about the elements that could drive their magic. In that world, wizards had the advantage of being able to invest and manipulate elements. For augmenters, the affinity of the elements was much more subtle, and the actual manifestation of the elements came only after the augmenter crossed a certain threshold. In the case of Reynolds, who had struggled and practiced hard from an early age, but had no formal training, he needed to reach the person stage to be able to turn explosions into actual fire. Whereas in the world he comes from, elements are not acquired at birth, but must be earned through hard work. Talent is a very important part, but since there is no limit to only one affinity, hard work will play an important role. As for Arthur, who had many advantages since coming to that world, he also learned a trick or two. Arthur was also not to be outdone and showed his lightning power and asked his father not to be too surprised. Everyone was shocked at the lightning that appeared around the boy, but Ray smiled proudly when he realized that his son had deviant abilities. Arthur jumped quickly to attack his father. Ray was not to be outdone. He tried to counterattack by giving a pretty powerful kick. Arthur managed to dodge, then jumped again towards his father, only to deliver a devastating blow. Ray managed to block the punch, but in the next second, they both fought each other until it created a huge explosion. The explosion was big enough to make some servants who were at a distance far enough to hear it. But the fight wasn't over yet. Ray flew at Arthur with a fiery punch. Once again, Arthur managed to dodge in time. Now, Ray tried to use a variety of punching techniques, but fortunately, Arthur was able to avoid them all. Arthur smiles proudly at his father as the man has sharper punches and a wider range of punches, making it difficult for him to get close to his father. But Arthur managed to find an opening and almost hit his father in the face. Ray also found an opening and almost kicked his son's body with his fiery foot. All the spectators were dumbfounded at this terrible scene. Finally, father and son laughed together, and the fight ended. Ray smiled proudly because his son had successfully learned the trick he had been taught. Arthur thought that Deviant's ability was by far his greatest, but he could still develop to be even better. His ice ability was unstable, and he hadn't even mastered sound or gravity. But still he felt happy to be able to brag a little to his parents. After the training, Ray asked when Arthur learned all those techniques. How did he learn them, and what does he know? Arthur explained he learned it not long ago, and he can barely control the ability. The boy lied by saying that he couldn't do the other techniques. Ellie ran towards them, asking how her father was, while Alice, the mother, chased the little girl from behind, telling her to be careful and not to run around like that. That left Vincent, who looked so shocked that he was dizzy and wanted a drink. He smiled at home, not expecting Arthur's extraordinary abilities. They all went inside the house while the servant came to the courtyard, stumbling with buckets of water to douse the flames that had appeared in several spots. As they all sat at the dinner table, in a drunken stupor, Vincent asked Ray if she knew what kind of future her genius son would have. Ray proudly replied that she had known since Arthur built up his powers when he was 3 years old. Tabitha was very surprised to hear that information. Alice explained that in the process Arthur almost blew up most of their house. Ray laughed contentedly at the thought of those exciting times. Vincent suddenly stood up as he remembered enrolling Arthur in the Cyrus Academy. The topic of the conversation, Arthur asked silently what they meant by Cyrus Academy. Ray explained that it needed to be done now because Arthur was only 8 years old, and Cyrus Academy was the most prestigious magical institution on the continent. Tabitha confirmed her husband's idea. Convinced of the talent Arthur had, it would be beneficial for them to sponsor the boy, so that his parents wouldn't have to worry about Arthur's school fees. Alice said that they couldn't do that because after all that Vincent's family was doing, they couldn't add to the burden by paying for Arthur's schooling. Especially since the boy was only 8 years old, it was possible that the academy wouldn't even take him seriously. But Vincent smiled proudly because he happened to do a lot of business with the famous director of the Cyrus Academy, so he could talk to that person and smooth things over. But Arthur politely interrupted their conversation when he stated that this affected his future. So he had something to say. Time passed, and by now Arthur was in the room with his parents after dinner, and they had put Ellie to bed. Arthur's parents were currently sitting with their son. Alice still couldn't believe that Arthur was in front of her with her. She was happy that Arthur had grown into a handsome man. The boy smiled proudly as he said that he had changed a lot since the last time they met. To Ray and Alice, no matter how much the boy had changed, Arthur was still their precious son. Even after learning that Arthur was a deviant wizard who would probably become one of the strongest wizards in the future, it was only the second best news of Arthur's arrival. Alice confirmed her husband's words. But suddenly Alice felt sad because maybe now Arthur was too old to be kissed goodnight. At first Arthur looked embarrassed when his mother said that, but suddenly he took the initiative to kiss his mother's cheek before lying on the bed. Not forgetting, the boy said goodnight to his mom and dad and emphasized that he missed them a lot and was happy to see them again. Before leaving, Alice tells Arthur that tomorrow they have to go out shopping with Ellie too. Alice wanted to get some new clothes for Arthur. She hoped this would be a good opportunity for Arthur to get closer to his sister. Arthur thought this sounded really good. Before they left the room, Ray had warned Arthur not to oppose Vincent when he was too excited. After all, Vincent only meant well. Earlier in the dining room, Arthur explained that he had just met his parents again today, so he wanted to spend some time with them before deciding whether or not to leave them again to attend the academy. Vincent could only confirm Arthur's words and realized that he had been overzealous to the point of overreacting. After that, Arthur excused himself as he was a little more tired than he thought. As Arthur walked away, Lilia looked at the boy with pity. Arthur wandered in an uncertain direction until he came to a dead end. Suddenly, Lilia appeared behind him to say that Arthur would end up in their family's basement if he kept heading in that direction. Lilia invites Arthur to go to a better place. It turned out that Lilia was taking Arthur to the servants' resting place. Lilia looked very excited as she greeted the servants and asked them not to mind the arrival of today's guest. The old woman, the butler, smiled as she welcomed Arthur, the boy who had burned down half of the courtyard they had worked so hard to maintain. Arthur smiled as he apologized for the trouble he had caused his new arrival. The manservant asked Arthur not to think too much of the old woman's words as she was only teasing Arthur. After Arthur and Lilia sat down, the boy realized Lilia was very excited for this, whereas before Lilia seemed quite quiet. But he felt that this was a habit that Lilia really liked. Sneaking quietly into the servants' resting place, Lilia asked excitedly if they had any duck meat left. The butler handed her a plate of duck while asking the little girl to be careful, because her mother was getting suspicious when she noticed Lilia's weight gain. Lilia reminded the old lady not to talk like that. The servant smiled at Lilia's funny behavior. One of the waiters whispered as he told Arthur that Lilia often sneaked into the place when she felt stressed. Lilia seemed to enjoy herself so much that she was no longer formal when talking to the waiters. The male servant explained that the great wish of Mr. and Mrs. Hellstein was for their daughter to wake up as a witch even though they were both weekends. Of course, Lilia also wanted to become a witch, but the pressure was too much for a little girl. That's why Lilia often ate a lot to release the burden of her mind in that place. Recalling the memories with the Hellstein family made Arthur declare to his parents that he could believe the Hellstein family were good people and must also mean well. Arthur would not doubt that. His parents smiled with pride that their son could see the good intentions of the Hellstein family. Only then could they both leave Arthur's room in peace. The next day the sun was shining brightly. Arthur was awakened by a gentle lick from Sylvie. Once awake, Arthur picked up the little dragon and played with it. Suddenly, Arthur remembered Tessia and wondered what Tessia was doing now. Arthur smelled a terrible odor coming from Sylvie's body, so he took the little dragon to the bathroom, saying that it seemed like he wasn't the only one who had to take a bath today. The sight of the water in the tub, Sylvie screamed as loud as she could, because she didn't like taking baths. After they had finished, Arthur asked Sylvie not to be too upset that the shower wasn't. There was a knock on the door. Arthur quickly opened the door and saw his sister standing outside the door. Ellie still looked very shy when she met her brother. Ellie explained that she was sent by her mother to wake Arthur up. The ceremony smiled happily as he asked Ellie to take him to their mother's place. When faced with Arthur's cheerful smile, Ellie was happy and excited, especially since today they were going shopping. Without hesitation, Ellie took Arthur by the hand to take him to their mother's place. At the market, Arthur was excited to see the bustling city of Cyrus. In one shop, Arthur saw the heads of several large beasts, and there was a large crystal stone underneath. Arthur was very curious, so he asked his mother what kind of shop it was. Tabitha explained that the small stone orbs Arthur saw were called breast cores. They were magical cores extracted from mana beasts to strengthen mages, though the effects between cores could vary greatly. It was tantamount to a small bet to spend hundreds of gold. But if one was lucky, one of those cores might contain the will of the beast. Arthur was shocked to hear that one small stone could cost hundreds of gold. Even according to Tabitha, it could cost thousands of gold. For Arthur, the will of the beast he had was already very good, so he wouldn't look at such an expensive item. Tabitha explained that Helstee's auction house received a few beast cores and even baby mana beasts. Arthur was welcome to take a closer look at them when he got the chance. Arthur smiled and sincerely thanked Tabitha for her offer. Then Lilia pushed Arthur to a place because she wanted to take him there immediately. It turned out that the place Lilia was referring to was a salon. Currently, Arthur was sitting in front of a flirtatious man in a pink shirt and his scissors. With a trembling voice, Arthur asked if he needed to do this, because he was very hesitant to get a haircut in that place, seeing the very suspicious hairdresser. Alice says that Arthur's hair looks really horrible, so he needs it fixed. The flirtatious man replies that Alice need not worry, as he will soon make her son shine like a perfect jewel. Arthur actually screamed inwardly at the man's words. Before long, the haircutting session was over, but Arthur felt stupid about his new look. Even so, for his mother, Arthur's appearance was perfect. Even Ellie thought Arthur's appearance was worthy of being called his brother. Alice smiled happily at her little girl's words. She thought Arthur looked like a gentlemanly gentleman. As they walked through the town, Arthur saw some young men making a mess. Lilia said that they were students from the Cyrus Academy. Arthur asked how she knew. Lilia explained, because their uniforms were some kind of status symbol in the city. To Arthur, it seemed like a surprise. Lilia explained that there were so many of them, they were almost considered royalty in some places. Alice asked what they were talking about. Lilia replied that they were talking about school. But when the girl looked to the side, she couldn't find Arthur, because the boy had already passed quickly while jumping like a small dog. Alice smiled at her son's seemingly excited and curious behavior. She explained that Arthur was usually calm and mature. It was surprising to see him this active. Tabitha, who was standing by Alice's side, said that she felt much more comfortable seeing Arthur act like a child, especially after seeing that horrible fight show. Now they all agreed with Tabitha's words as they recalled Arthur's gruesome face while practicing yesterday. Arthur entered the gun shop and immediately looked through the collection of weapons in the place with a beaming face. Two adult men approached Arthur and asked what the boy wanted you to do. One of the men said sternly that the character was not a place for children to play, so he told Arthur to leave immediately while he was still talking nicely. Another man said that Arthur didn't understand what it was, especially since what he was looking at was a very dangerous weapon. The man told Arthur to get out and go to the candy store instead. Of course, Arthur took offense. The boy said that he knew enough about weapons, but he apologized for blocking the road and entering the place. The man who owned the shop was offended by Arthur's rude remarks. It was at this moment that Alice and the others entered. Alice immediately asked them to remove their hands from Arthur. The man prepared to get angry at Alice and boasted of his family status. But when he saw Tabitha Helstee's figure, instantly the man's expression turned pale. Tabitha recognized the man as a family member of the Revenport branch. She planned to revoke the participation of the man and his family from the Helstee auction house. Hearing such a threat immediately made the shopkeeper prostrate and beg for mercy. He didn't expect Arthur to be with the Helstee family. The man really apologized and begged for forgiveness from the bottom of his heart. After that, they all left the shop. Arthur thanked Tabitha for helping him out of that situation. Tabitha explained that she was actually more worried if Arthur did something to the shop owner. Then they all laughed at the truth of Tabitha's words. It turned out that they were currently being watched by a mysterious man. But luckily they made it home and got home safely. When they entered the house, Vincent and Ray were waiting in the living room. Vincent asked Arthur to join them, because he was going to introduce someone to him. It turned out that in front of the two adult men was sitting an old woman who was waiting for Arthur's arrival. The old woman in witch's clothing introduced herself as Cynthia Goodsky. That is the director and founder of the Cyrus Academy. Cyrus Academy was an institution that was praised as the most prominent sanctuary for any aspiring wizard of privilege who had the background and talent for mastery. The Academy was a breeding ground for renowned scholars, guild members, leaders, royal guards, and centers of military power. Everyone who made an impact in that world must have some connection to the Cyrus Academy. Such was the fame that this school had, an academy that could not be compared to the many other academies scattered across the continent. And standing at the top of it all was the director of the academy himself, Director Goodsky, the figure who was currently standing in front of Arthur and observing him. Arthur was silent for a long time while observing the old woman. It seemed like this boy didn't know what to do when facing Cynthia Goodsky. Finally, Lady Cynthia extended her hand first while saying that she was happy to meet Arthur. Here, Arthur was still confused as to what he should do in this situation. Should Arthur kiss her hand or just shake it? Just as Arthur was about to take Lady Cynthia's hand, the mother grabbed his head and immediately forced her son to bow down. Alice apologized to Lady Cynthia for Arthur's clueless rudeness. Since he had just returned home, he didn't understand the formal customs of the place. Arthur was very full and hoped it wouldn't take long as he hadn't eaten for hours. Lady Cynthia said that she was fine with Arthur's attitude because it was wrong of him to come at such a late hour. However, Lady Cynthia could not refuse Vincent's invitation after the great contribution he had made to the Cyrus Academy. Vincent explained that he only helped the academy because he hoped that his son would someday enter the academy. Upon hearing her father's words, Lilia became sad, because until now she still hadn't shown any awakening. Lady Cynthia said that she rarely made big trips to visit prospective students, but Vincent piqued her interest when he insisted that a miracle had happened at her house. So the director asked Tabitha to take them to an open room so she could see a demonstration of Arthur's powers. Hearing the old lady's request made Arthur want to say that he actually wanted to eat, but his mother prevented the boy from talking too much in front of Lady Cynthia. Vincent would take the lady director to the paved courtyard at their place, which was suitable for this. Behind them, Arthur walked with a sluggish body because they couldn't eat now. As they walked, Sylvie jumped in first, catching Lady Cynthia's attention. This lady thought that Arthur's beast was very beautiful. She suspects it is a beast that has a contract with Ray. Arthur explains that the creature is his, not from his father. The creature had just hatched a few months ago. Lady Cynthia thinks the creature is very interesting, because many nobles in that place buy beasts to make contracts, but she has never seen a beast like Sylvie. Arthur explained that Sylvie's mother was some kind of scaly wolf with small wings. She was almost dead and was protecting her eggs when Arthur entered her cave. Arthur was lucky that time. After a while they finally reached the large courtyard of the house. Lady Cynthia wanted to see if what Mr. Vincent said was exaggerated or not, because he mentioned Arthur was an augmenter, but Mr. Vincent wouldn't tell her anything other than that. Here Lady Cynthia saw jokingly that the man did not seem anxious or afraid. She thinks Arthur is overconfident or bragging. In fact, Arthur was curious about the current dinner menu. Was it grilled fish? Because he was really hungry. Vincent was sure Lady Cynthia would be shocked when Arthur showed her his fire and lightning magic, and he certainly wouldn't be able to burn down the courtyard like he had before, now that it was so extensively concreted. Before starting, Lady Cynthia asked if Arthur didn't want to order his own fall. At the very least, he could bring a weapon. Arthur replied that since Lady Cynthia had no intention of removing the staff she was carrying, Arthur would also go forward empty-handed. Lady Cynthia looked down at the small staff at her waist with a pleased smile. She didn't expect Arthur to be so attentive to such detail. Finally, the fight will begin. Before that, Arthur recalled his past memories. During his training with the Virion, the explosive power of fire and the adaptive flow of water were the first key arts from his world to materialize as actual elements in this world for him. After that, the earth and wind style martial arts techniques from his previous life also peaked. Arthur stumped his foot on the concrete until it shattered. The experience of controlling ki from a past life allowed him to control the mix of internal and ambient mana as he molded it into the desired effect. Arthur stomped his foot again as the concrete beneath his foot shattered even more. Vincent and everyone else who saw it were shocked. This technique is different from magicians. It is a fundamental step that Aikmentors take in order to manifest elemental attacks. Force. Arthur had a little help from the knowledge in his previous life. Now Arthur wanted to see how the most powerful person in the Star Academy would react when he suddenly flew up and kicked a boulder right at Lady Cynthia. The sizable rock flew towards Lady Cynthia. Although initially startled, the old woman smiled and then created a large enough wind to instantly shatter the boulder. Lady Cynthia then used the fragments of the boulder to strike back at Arthur. Not to be outdone, Arthur jumped up while also using the wind to attack the woman at high speed. Lady Cynthia was very agile. She used more wind power to push Arthur further. Arthur realized she was using the wind to defeat him. Even Lady Cynthia was clever enough to be able to use rocks in the air to attack him. Even with all his training with Virions, it was still difficult to use earth and wind together compared to fire and water. Arthur had to concentrate more to be able to counterattack. Arthur leaped with the power of fire towards the still calm Lady Cynthia. The sorceress created such a huge tornado that the Arthur immediately stopped, and everyone hugged each other to protect their families. Arthur was pushed back, but Lady Cynthia had already finished casting the spell. Arthur was surprised at the speed with which she finished another spell. There were now several tornadoes surrounding Lady Cynthia. Arthur realized this was wind magic with opposite rotation to deflect the tornadoes. Despite this, Arthur didn't lose his mind. He destroyed the huge tornado with his agility and wind technique. Because of this technique, Arthur's clothes were torn again. Lady Cynthia smiled happily at the boy's skill. As Arthur fell right in front of her, Lady Cynthia commented that the rupture was quite impressive, but she was too confident in Arthur's ability to face an opponent head-on. In all of his battle skills so far, Lady Cynthia thought the boy was truly exceptional, but she still had one last test for Arthur. Lady Cynthia asked the boy to remain conscious as she snapped her fingers right at Arthur. A flash of light appeared in front of Arthur until a very loud buzzing sound was heard. Arthur panicked and covered his ears because of the horrible sound. Now Arthur realized that the woman was also a deviant. Even though he was in a lot of pain, Arthur was still completely conscious, so that made Lady Cynthia amazed at him. Lady Cynthia walked out of the sample testing area smiling and declared that Arthur passed. Since Arthur had demonstrated his wind magic talent, Lady Cynthia was tempted to teach him herself. Ray approaches Arthur with a shocked look on her face. She asked when Arthur learned to use earth and wind magic too. When Lady Cynthia heard the man's words, she wondered and asked what did he mean by two. From the edge of the arena, with a shocked face, Vincent explained that just yesterday he used fire magic and lightning magic. That was why he brought Lady Cynthia to this paved courtyard, because Arthur had burned down the courtyard yesterday. Lady Cynthia was very surprised to hear all that, because she wanted this to mean that such a small boy could control at least 3 elements, and then rise to the deviant level. Arthur explained that he could actually control 4 elements. The boy raised his right hand and showed the 4 elements swirling around his hand as he had an affinity for all 4 elements. Lady Cynthia was so shocked to see this that she almost fell down, but fortunately Ray caught her. Ray helped her stand up properly while asking if she was okay. Lady Cynthia thanked him and explained that she was fine. Alice looks very shocked because she just realized Arthur's ability. Ellie looks confused as she asks if her brother is a strong person. Lady Cynthia answers Ellie by explaining that Arthur is very strong. You could even say that he is a very strong figure in this era. After everyone calmed down, Arthur apologized to his family for feeling this way about them. Alice awkwardly asked the boy to keep no more secrets between them. Arthur's chest tightened when he heard his mother's request. He wished he could promise that, but in reality he still had many secrets. Everyone was excited after learning about Arthur's abilities. But suddenly Lady Cynthia touched his shoulder and created an energy field between just the two of them. Lady Cynthia explained to Arthur that his family could not hear their conversation while the protective spell was active, so Arthur could speak whatever was on his mind to Lady Cynthia. Arthur smiled happily that she could read his thoughts. Arthur explained that he had deliberately shown his abilities to Lady Cynthia because there were two things that she had that Arthur currently needed. They are power and influence. Arthur hopes that Lady Cynthia will keep his family safe until the boy becomes strong enough to do it himself. That way, Arthur would attend the academy and would think of Lady Cynthia as his helper. Lady Cynthia replied that the king and queen of Supine would not dare to make such a one-sided deal with her. He asked if Arthur thought that Lady Cynthia would readily agree to a relationship with just a child. Arthur explained that, compared to the king and queen, Arthur was more aware of his potential. He was sure Lady Cynthia could also see his potential. However, the end of the deal was that Arthur would have to wait until he was old enough to enter academia, because as Lady Cynthia saw it, Arthur had promised someone important to live his life the way he wanted to, and he thought that entering the academy at a more normal age would be helpful. Lady Cynthia was surprised to hear Arthur's words because that meant more than 3 years from now. Lady Cynthia wondered what Arthur wanted until then. Arthur sighed heavily because the truth was that he had not told his family about this. Arthur looked at his family outside the dimensional wall while explaining that he had decided to become an adventurer. Being an adventurer, it was something that Arthur had thought carefully about even though he had not said anything to his family. The short battle to prove Vincent's glorified strength was over, and as he wanted, Arthur had to discuss his wishes with his parents. Of course, Alice was the first to object to Arthur's desire to become an adventurer, especially since the boy had just returned after being presumed dead. Alice even told Arthur to violate her corpse if the boy really wanted to be desperate to become an adventurer. Ellie burst into tears, terrified to see her mother as angry as she was. The little girl begged her mother not to get angry because she was really scared. Arthur sat in front of them with his head down, reluctant to look at his mother's angry face and his crying sister while tugging at the hem of Alice's skirt. His father was beside his mother, making a puzzled face while scratching his neck that didn't itch. Slivy also seemed to be snoring in fear under Arthur's feet. Ray tried to persuade his wife to listen to Arthur's explanation first. Alice quickly turned away and faced Ray with an angry face this time more than ever. Us didn't understand. How could Ray say that after everything they went through to get here? Alice was even more sad because she felt Ray didn't understand her and her suffering, even though Ray really understood how they struggled to get to that place. Still with his head bowed, Arthur stepped closer to his parents who hugged each other. Likewise with Ellie, who cried even harder because her mother did not calm down, and this time accompanied by crying. Arthur took and grasped Alice's cold hand while explaining that he wasn't planning to leave so soon. He planned to spend a few months in that house with all of them. Arthur realized that he had just come to the place, but after living in elf country for several years, he felt like he had missed so much time in Supine. Arthur wanted to have the same experience when his parents were adventurers. Ray's face lit up when he heard that his son wanted to be an adventurer like the early days. Ray felt proud and stated that he knew where such adventurous desires came from. In the past, Ray also couldn't wait to experience being an adventurer when he got up in his teens. But as a mother, Alice had every right to be anxious. Ray knew her son was well prepared and strong, but life as an adventurer was dangerous and unpredictable. Slivy jumped suddenly, flew up and landed on Arthur's right shoulder, as if to say that his presence would protect Arthur from danger, and Arthur understood that. So Arthur said that he had several guards or watchers with him. Hearing Arthur's explanation made Ray say that it wasn't a bad idea. He even started wondering who was suitable to be Arthur's bodyguard. Ray's words made the man get a surprise attack from Alice. This woman grabbed Ray's shirt collar while saying that she didn't expect her husband to immediately decide on that without talking further to her. Alice was really not willing to send her favorite son away for 3 years. Seeing Alice's increasingly terrible anger, Ellie became even more frightened, so she turned to hug Arthur's waist. The two boys did not expect their mother to be this angry and furious. Realizing his mother's anger was growing, Arthur tried to explain that he wouldn't be gone for 3 years. He planned to return every few months or even between missions. Ray sat leaning back with a pale face next to Alice, who was smiling a strange grin. The look on the woman's face seemed to say, "Really?" to Arthur, who was sitting across from her. Seeing the hesitation shown by the mother made Arthur emphasize his seriousness. A touch on his thigh stopped what he was about to say. Little Ellie asked with a sad face, "Is Seng Kakak going to leave soon again?" Arthur panicked seeing his sister's sad face. He quickly answered no several times and stated that he would remain in that place so that Ellie would see his face often. Alice interrupted their moment when she said, "She hasn't given her approval yet, but Arthur should at least answer her question. Why does Arthur want to be an adventurer now? Because he thought it would make more sense to go to school before leaving to become an adventurer." Arthur explained that if he went to school now, he would be a little younger than the other students. He wants to fit in and make friends with a lot of people, but that might be more difficult with the age difference being too big. Alice is still trying to dissuade Arthur by saying that he doesn't have to go to school now. Arthur can look for other opportunities such as helping his father, but Ray interrupted his wife's conversation. With a calm face full of wisdom, Ray asked Alice to calm down, because he was very confident that their son would be fine. Arthur smiled broadly at what Ray said. He thanked his father for his trust. Arthur's hands were clenched tightly. In his heart, he didn't just want to train. He wanted to fight and test his skills that he had learned since coming to this world. When he saw Alice beating Ray, Arthur realized that he did love his parents, but he didn't want to lie to his feelings and his mother for too long. That Sylvia told him to enjoy life. This morning, they had breakfast as usual with the dining table fully occupied. For a moment, Alice sighed, seeing her husband, who seemed to be possessed by food demons. Alice asked Ray to eat slowly because no one would steal his food. Vincent remembered something. He asked Ray, shouldn't he go to the auction house to mentor new members? Ray replied that it was just an excuse to hold a welcome party. Vincent came to understand that's where the excessive food costs came from. Lilia, who heard the stupid conversation, covered her face with one hand and opined that this was a very embarrassing thing. Arthur looked at his mother and asked what their plans were today. Tabitha explained that she and Alice had to run some errands around town to prepare for the upcoming event at the Hellstee auction house. They will bring Ellie and Lilia. There could also come if he wanted. Arthur smiled cheerfully and said he would stay at home today. He thanked Tabitha profusely for her offer. Then Vincent asked if they had solved the problem yesterday. Alice explained they agreed to let her be an adventurer with some conditions. Ray held up 3 fingers in front of her face while saying, first, she has to wait until her birthday in 3 months. Second, she must have a guard during the mission. And third, she must visit them at least once every 2 months. Besides, she was smart enough and could manage the rest on her own. Ray turned around to find Arthur fighting over food with Sylvie. Yeah, at least Ray hopes her son is smart enough. Vincent says, that's all good, but have they decided who will be Arthur's caretaker? Are there any capable guards to look after him? Vincent's question brought back memories of Arthur hitting one of the best guards in the place on the head. The big man was reduced to tears by the fear of Arthur's extraordinary fighting skills. Everyone had the same thought. If such a proud and fearsome warrior could lose to Arthur, then who was worthy to protect him? Ray suddenly stood up from her seat with a bang on the table. She remembered that Twin Horns would come to the place after the dungeon expedition. She would get a letter from the guild members saying they would be back in 2 months. They could choose one of the Twin Horns members to go with Arthur. Alice was shocked, but thought it was a pretty good idea. Seeing his wife's shocked face, Ray asked her not to materialize when she had a good idea. Arthur smiled happily at the name of the Twin Horns team. He couldn't wait to meet Jemine, Durden, Angela, Helen and Adam again. To their years of separation, in his heart Arthur shouted out loud, he would see them all soon. In the midst of his seriousness, the door to his office was knocked 3 times. Vincent stopped his pen as he was writing, staring at the door in confusion. Still, he got up from his chair and saw who was visiting his office so early. It was Arthur. Vincent had a feeling that Arthur might miss him, especially since they rarely met, because Arthur was currently in the auction house. With a big smile and both hands behind his back, Arthur said quietly, he had a specific purpose, and it was quite important to him, so he came to Vincent. Although Vincent was confused about what the little boy in front of him meant, he invited Arthur into his office, feeling quite nervous. The crowds were everywhere. The food was plentiful. It was very appetizing and seemed to be loved by many people who came. Tabitha, Alice, Ellie and Lilia were already in the crowd of Helstey's auction house. They joined the many people who were apparently observing how beautiful the centerpieces were in Alice's hands. She felt a bit confused herself. Is something like this really appropriate for the 10th anniversary? Tabitha glanced at Alice, who was indeed feeling insecure, but Tabitha confidently supported and encouraged Alice. Moreover, the centerpiece made by Alice was something that was highly coveted by many noble ladies. Meanwhile, Alice was still hesitating. How could they see it? Her face and pair of eyes were astonished. Tabitha made a convincing face by blinking one eye and showing 2 thumbs. Tabitha apparently stole some from home and used them to decorate the audience's private room in her county auction house. Alice was shocked by Tabitha's confident answer. Alice felt that it was just a small, cheap ornament that she usually made in her spare time. Alice felt that it was very embarrassing. She shook her head and covered her face with her hands. Tabitha, who was still beside her, just chuckled, although it was true that Alice's ornament was very good and special. Lilia allowed the 2 mothers to uphold each other. She looked to the side and saw Ellie, who was making a cute, jealous face. Ellie pursed her lips, probably out of annoyance and anger. It was probably Lilia's fault for not taking her shopping to the market that morning. Ellie looked disappointed because she actually wanted to go with Lilia. Lilia, who felt guilty, immediately made a sad face with teary eyes, even though she didn't take Ellie to the market. But now that they were together, Lilia also mentioned a few things about brother and sister problems. This made Ellie feel sad, and that she was the one who had wronged Lilia. Although Ellie didn't know the reason why Lilia didn't bring her, but when she heard Lilia say sad things about Ellie's brother, who, if he had been there at that time, would have made Ellie happy. Ellie cried, screaming that she really recognized Lilia as her sister, her best sister. A cry that never ended. Her hands were clenched in front of her chest, showing the seriousness of what she was saying. But Lilia still pretended to feel hurt, and acted as if she was very sad that Ellie no longer wanted her. She again teased Ellie with a pair of rec playing, mentioning that her sister was already there, and that maybe she didn't need Lilia anymore. Lilia felt hurt, and her head was spinning. Lilia's mother watches from a distance as her daughter continues to make Ellie cry. She went to her, and Lilia's head was hit back by her mother, causing her sentence to stop. Lilia's mother is upset that Lilia teased Ellie to get her in trouble. Her hands were clasped around her waist. Lilia was in a bit of pain and looked at her mother's face on the side. She just wanted to tease Ellie. Lilia also mentioned Arthur's problem in front of her mother and Ellie. because at that time all Ellie had in mind was Arthur. She pointed at Ellie with a cute blush on her face, with her cheeks quivering with tears. Tabitha made a thinking gesture by stroking her chin. She didn't quite believe Lilia's statement. She felt that it was possible that not only Ellie was thinking about Arthur, but also her little daughter had set her heart on that man. It wasn't just Alice who reacted by dramatically closing her mouth when she heard Tabitha's last sentence. Even now, Lilia's face was as red as a boiled crab. Her mother's question was so baseless. Lilia dodged with an erratic feeling, hitting her mother's thigh because she was too upset. Lilia felt Arthur was just a strange man. She thought her mother would just say children her age couldn't be witches yet. Tabitha began to wonder at Lilia's discordant tone. What was wrong with her daughter? But Tabitha firmly replied she was still patiently waiting to be resurrected. But Arthur is already a stronger wizard than most adults. The reason wanted to wait a little longer. Lilia shook her body. She looked at several people with a feeling of anger and disappointment. It felt very unfair to her. She also wanted to become a witch and make everyone feel happy. The happy atmosphere changed drastically. Alice and Tabitha looked at each other with Lilia suddenly crying. Alice approached Lilia and held her shoulders gently with Alice's smile. She understood how Lilia felt at that moment, rubbing her shoulders several times. A gentle touch. Alice tried to calm Lilia down. Alice also tried to make Lilia realize that Arthur was a child who was her age, but had something different about him. She didn't want to make Lilia unhappy or make her feel inferior. Lilia still felt confused and hadn't accepted it clearly. She didn't understand why Arthur was so strong compared to other children. Lilia felt that Mr. Luyan and Alice had trained her to be what she was now. She also wanted to get the same kind of training that Arthur did. She was nervous, but Lilia also had to convey the feelings in her heart. But Alice shook her head. Tabitha was shocked. She really didn't expect Alice's response. She also couldn't believe 100% about Arthur's power that he got for free. Tabitha felt that maybe they had missed something, because it was impossible for someone to have something special without a reason. But it wasn't that Tabitha wanted to pry into something that she didn't know either. Alice was taken aback, but she felt that it didn't matter either way, as it was natural for some people to feel suspicious about Arthur. She felt the odd thing from the beginning. The moon was just her, but also Ray. They knew that Arthur was hiding something from them. Tabitha was suspicious again. She was curious why Alice didn't ask Arthur. And did they also not ask why Arthur became so strong after he left, especially when he met several bandits at that time? He also used his sword skillfully. Tabitha felt that they must also really want to know. Tabitha only expressed her opinion subtly and hoped that what she said would not offend Alice. Alice smiled with a hand that patted the top of the head of Lilia, who was still crying. She would definitely find out and take her time. But Alice also felt that Arthur might be hiding it for some reason. Alice would always support Arthur until he felt comfortable enough, and then Arthur himself would tell them. She felt that was what it really meant to be a parent. Tabitha shrugged her shoulders to accept what Alice had said. Then she led them to leave the auction house because there were still many places they would go. From behind the dark, tall houses, something was stalking them. A person in a black robe with a hood that hid his face. The mysterious man walked into a small alley and entered an unused room filled with trash. Across from him, there was another hooded person waiting for the man to provide information before acting. The man told someone to go to Lord Sebastian immediately, discussing again about Beast not being with them that day. He also said that a mage from Cyrus Academy had been stationed to guard them, so he could not track them too deeply. She was silent for a moment. However, the boy who was most likely the master of the Mana Beast would be attending the Hellstee Auction House's 10-year anniversary event. The person on the other side snapped his fingers and made a coded sound that he understood what his colleague was saying. Then he would tell Mr. Sebastian that the best chance was at that event. Then they turned their backs on each other, and get out of there before anyone finds out what they were doing. Back to Vincent, who was staring curiously at the little boy in front of him. An awkward atmosphere naturally enveloped the two, making Vincent curse inwardly. The man thought hard about the tension he felt when the 8-year-old boy made it seem as if his presence was so strong that he became nervous, more nervous than when he was with the Supine King. When served a warm cup of tea, Arthur felt quite flattered. Arthur, in a very elegant and calm manner, placed his tea back in the cup holder. Vincent felt his hair stand on end. He was different than when he was with his family. Is this his true demeanor? He said to himself. He raised his glasses with one finger. Quite nervously, Vincent faced Arthur. Arthur immediately told him his true intentions and purpose for coming to Vincent's residence. He wanted Vincent to get some special items for himself. Meanwhile, Vincent, who did not understand, asked, what exactly was the item Arthur wanted? He came all the way to his place. Arthur wanted a protective cloak that would be better if it had a hood, a sword worthy of his size, and a mask that could change his voice. Arthur was sitting with his legs crossed. His tone was thick with command, leaving no room for Vincent to object to what he was saying. Vincent stood up from his seat and stepped towards the cupboard that contained what Arthur wanted. Protective cloak was fine. If it was a mask, only an artificer could make it properly. Vincent would have tried, but Vincent stopped what he was saying on his own. He remembered that he was busy preparing for the anniversary of the auction house. But why did he want to help this boy? Arthur was very grateful to Vincent, but he had nothing to compensate him with. However, Arthur would think of other ways to repay Vincent for his help. Vincent didn't mind anything. He felt fine too, remembering that Arthur's father had been very helpful since he started working for him. Thanks to him and the training he provided for all our guards, the thefts and fights in the auction house are the lowest they've ever been. Arthur did not agree with what Vincent said. He still wanted to pay him back, but he thought it was different. Arthur just wanted to help his sister speed up her revival with the methods he had discovered recently. While he was helping her, he could also help Lilia. Vincent was taken aback by Arthur's statement. The boy nodded his head as he knew that Vincent and his wife were not wizards, but he believed he could help Vincent's daughter to awaken as a wizard and attend Cyrus Academy. Just like last morning, with full concentration, Arthur tried to unleash all his strength on a scale to try to control an orb that he used as his power medium. He tried to move and make the object within his control, but he failed. Sweat poured down his forehead. The ball dropped. Arthur bent over, feeling exhausted. Just below his eyes was a glowing yellow lightning bolt. Even after all this time, he could only use it for a few seconds. The boy exhaled roughly. Then came the silhouettes of Lord Virion and Lady Cynthia, telling him to try harder. The afternoon came quickly. All his energy was almost gone just for this one exercise, even though it was like that he would not give up easily. From the window of his room, Arthur could see his mother and sister as well as Tabitha and Lilia getting off the train. They were finally returning from the auction house. The sight made his spirit flare up again. In his past and present life, he needed the strength to protect the people he cared about. And she couldn't stop just because she was tired or bored. She would continue training and reaching out until she mastered everything. The night in the hustle and bustle of the suburbs was eerie. The rain came drenching the poorly lit streets along the way, making dirty puddles with an unpleasant odor. From the darkness, a small child ran very fast. In a brown shirt and shorts, his right hand was holding a black bundle very carefully. But then he unexpectedly let go of the bundle, and the contents were scattered in a puddle of rainwater. Without stopping his running, the boy left quickly. He seemed to be in a hurry and suddenly stopped running. Ahead, at the end of the alley, there was a group of people surrounding a person who had passed away with a white cloth covering the body. The person had white hair that he recognized very well. The boy screamed helplessly. When he was about to approach, there were two people who seemed to hand over the evidence of the instrument of death to his companion. pistol wrapped in transparent white plastic was immediately accepted by someone who was busy writing in the caption paper. This time he would become strong not for revenge, but to keep them safe. Arthur uncovered his sweaty forehead. Determination shone on his face. Sylvie tried to call out to Arthur, who was retraining. The small animal stood next to Arthur, trying to say something, as if he understood what Sylvie was saying. Arthur nodded in understanding. She's right. It looks like they have indeed returned from their task, just like what I saw at the window earlier. The two of them walked out of the room and down the stairs to the lower floor. The mother's protesting face greeted them. Alice frowned and walked over to her son. Arthur, what does he mean by making Lilia a witch? Even if it was a joke, it was a bit disrespectful. She thought it was too much. Tabitha interrupted Alice's words with a face that seemed to strongly disagree with what she heard from her husband. Arthur tried to put on a face to calm everyone down. He casually and calmly spoke in response to what his mother and Tabitha had said. He would never joke about something like this. I made a deal with Mr. Helsty, and he agreed to it. Vincent's face was very flowery. He hugged his daughter and lifted her up in his arms. He told her that Arthur would show them when everything was back, so they had to go to the family room immediately. Tabitha couldn't help but worry, and neither could Alice, because if this failed, they were sure Lilia would be very disappointed, and it would have a very bad impact. They all gathered in the living room. Vincent, Tabitha, and Alice sat in a row on the chairs. They looked anxiously at their children, who sat in the middle of the living room carpet. Arthur sat in the center between Lilia and Ellie, who had their backs to him. His right and left hands touching the backs of the two little girls together. With a serious face, he began to speak. Good, now, I want you to breathe according to my directions. Arthur had planned this because the best time to experience mana is when breathing slowly with the right tempo. Arthur also prayed that his explanation would be understood by the two girls. The first step is to breathe in a special way. Lilia raised her eyebrows, breathing in a special way. Ellie could breathe easily, with a frown on her face, with a slight glance at her sister. Arthur chuckled. He told Ellie that it's not just about breathing. If she could do it, she could become as strong as her brother. Ellie's face seemed to blush with excitement. She really wanted to be strong like her brother. With a little more hope, Arthur prayed they understood his instructions, which he used simple language as much as possible. The two got ready with their backs straight. Behind them, Arthur stayed in the same place and position. However, breathe through this, he said as he modeled slowly. Arthur took a breath and let it out at a moderate pace. The two hands behind the girls' backs began to follow his instructions. He asked Ellie to take deep breaths from her nose to the limit of what she could. When she could no longer inhale, then Ellie could open her mouth and inhale once more. Ellie very swiftly carried out what her sister told her to be strong. Her cheeks puffed up with air. Lilia also followed Arthur's instructions very well. Then, let out the air in small puffs for 15 times. Ellie and Lilia immediately understood and exhaled slowly for 15 times. Arthur grinned happily. Well done. There was a difference between the two looks on the couple's faces. Vincent with an encouraging fist and Tabitha with a very worried look on her face. Arthur asked Ellie to repeat with her eyes closed until she saw a beautiful light floating in the darkness. Ellie immediately saw the beautiful light, but then it was gone. Ellie looked disappointed that the ball of light was gone, but Arthur explained that it was natural because his sister stopped her special breathing. Unlike Ellie, who immediately saw the glowing orbs in the dark, Lilia hasn't found them yet. She still couldn't see them, so she felt that something was wrong with her. Arthur immediately explained that it was fine. Lilia's parents weren't witches, so Arthur had expected it. Arthur had prepared everything carefully. Alice asked her son, what was he doing? Tabitha explained that she knew Arthur's intentions were good, and Tabitha would not question his abilities as a wizard. But teaching a child to rise as a witch was something unprecedented, because it was supposed to happen naturally. Arthur explained that he just wanted to help them do what he did when he was 3 years old. Arthur thinks the only reason he can do all that is because of his compatibility with all the elements. Arthur had done some simulations in his head, and they would only know after trying to do it. Arthur asked them to calm down and just pay attention. The 3 of them began to close their eyes and concentrate again. Arthur explained that their bodies might feel a little hot, but he asked them to keep breathing as Arthur had taught them. Arthur's mana core began to glow and spread up the arms and into Ellie and Lilia's bodies. After a while, Lilia finally saw the light too. She was very happy. So was Ellie. The light she saw was more colorful. Arthur began to give intrusions to unite the lights. Ellie was confused about what it meant to unite the lights. Arthur tries to explain that the little light is Ellie's friend, and they will be happy together. So he asks Ellie to unite them. Ellie was excited to hear Arthur's request. After that, it was quiet because they had to be very focused. During this time, Arthur expended a lot of his energy. When this first session ended, he immediately flopped down next to Ellie, who also looked exhausted. Sweat poured down their foreheads, faces, and clothes. Arthur felt he had reached the peak of exhaustion. This was as far as he could go. Vincent approached Arthur and asked if Lilia could become a witch. Arthur explained that it would take a few years, but if Arthur did this with them for a few months, they would probably soon be able to do it on their own. Lilia should also have no problem becoming a witch. Suddenly, Tabitha hugged Arthur and cried in the boy's arms. Tabitha apologized for dumping Arthur's abilities. Then she thanked him sincerely, because now, thanks to Arthur's help, Lilia had many opportunities that they couldn't give her, because they weren't witches. Lilia smiled happily with tears of emotion. So did Vincent, who cried with emotion while looking at his daughter. Day after day, Arthur spent as a special teacher for the 2 girls he was responsible for, namely, Lilia and Ellie. The little man found his life more enjoyable than ever. Every morning, he would hear Lilia's screams and his sister's song of origin. Arthur was even more eager to awaken their magical abilities. He also wouldn't miss his own training sessions, like today. The bluish light with the cold snowflakes was slowly being mastered by Arthur. It might not be long before he was able to control the magic elements. Arthur spent his time practicing and hanging out with his family equally. Arthur realized that even with his impatience to become stronger, he still spent time with everyone. Arthur realized he would not have this kind of opportunity in the future, so he would cherish this precious time he had.